Welcome to this mini project where you're going to get the experience of creating S3 multi-region access points. Now, multi-region access points give you the ability to create a single S3 global endpoint and point this at multiple S3 buckets. It's an effective way to use a single endpoint to route requests to the closest S3 service. Now, in order to do this mini project, you need to be logged in to an AWS account with admin permissions. If you're using one of my courses, then you should use the I am admin user of the general AWS account, which is the management account of the organization. If you're not using my courses, make sure you're using an identity with admin permissions. You'll also need to select two different AWS regions to perform this mini project. We're going to create S3 buckets in two regions. I'm going to use AP Southeast 2 or the Sydney region and CA Central 1 or the Canada region. Now, the first thing to do is to move to the S3 console, so type S3 in the search box at the top and then open that in a new tab. Once you're there, we're going to create two buckets. So first, go ahead and click on Create Bucket. Now, we'll keep the bucket naming consistent, so we'll use multi-region-demo- and then the region that you're in. So in my case, Sydney. And then at the end, I want you to append on a random number. In my case, 1337. Remember, S3 bucket names need to be globally unique, and this will ensure both of our buckets are. Once you've put the name, make sure you set the region correctly. Everything else can be left as default, apart from we need to enable bucket versioning. So set this box under versioning to enable. Then scroll to the bottom and click on Create Bucket. Then we need to follow that same process again for the second bucket. So click on Create Bucket. Use the same bucket naming, so multi-region-demo- and then the region name, in this case Canada, and make sure you append your random number and set the region. Then scroll down, enable bucket versioning again, and create the bucket. Now, once we've got these two buckets, we're going to create the multi-region access point. So click on multi-region access point on the menu on the left, and click Create Multi-Region Access Point. For the name, you can pick whatever you want. It doesn't need to be globally unique, only unique within an AWS account. I'm going to pick really critical cat data, and then scroll down and add the buckets that you've just created. These can't be added or edited after creation, so we need to do it now. So click on Add Buckets, select the two buckets, and then click on Add Buckets to confirm. Once you've done that, scroll down to the bottom and click Create Multi-Region Access Point. Now, this process can take, worst case, up to 24 hours to complete, but typically it creates much faster, generally around 10 to 30 minutes. Now, we do need this to be created before we continue, so go ahead and pause the video, wait for the status on this to change to ready, and then you're good to continue. Okay, so now that we've got this multi-region access point configured and it's ready to go, now that we've got this multi-region access point configured, we need to configure replication between the two buckets, because anyone using this multi-region access point will be directed to the closest S3 bucket, and we need to make sure that the data in both matches. So to do that, go ahead and click on the multi-region access point name and go inside there, and you'll see that the access point has an Amazon resource name as well as an alias. Now, you should probably note down the Amazon resource name because we might need it later on. Once you've done that, click on the Replication and Failover tab, and you'll be able to see a graphical representation of any replication or failover configuration. If we click on the Replication tab, you'll see there's no replication configured. If we click on the Failover tab, you can see that we've got these two S3 buckets in different AWS regions configured as an active failover configuration, which means any requests made to this multi-region access point will be delivered to either of these S3 buckets as long as they're available. Now, we can click on one and click on Edit Routing Status and configure it as passive, which means it will only be used if no active buckets exist. But in our case, we want it to be active, so we'll leave both of these set to active. Now, we want to configure replication between the buckets, so we're going to scroll down to Replication Rules and click Create Replication Rule. Now there are two templates available to start with: replicate objects amongst all specified buckets and replicate objects from one or more source buckets to one or more destination buckets. Now which of these you pick depends on the architecture that you're using, but because we have an active configuration, we want all of the buckets to be the same. So we're going to pick the replicate objects among all specified buckets template. So this is replicating between every bucket and every other bucket. Essentially, it creates a set of buckets which contain exactly the same data, all fronted by a multi-region access point. So go ahead and make sure this template is selected, and then click to select both of the buckets that you created. In my case, Sydney and Canada. Once we've done that, scroll down. You can set whether you want the status to be enabled or disabled when created. We're going to choose enabled, and you get to adjust the scope. So you can either have it configured so that you can replicate objects using one or more filters, or you can apply to all objects in the bucket. Now we want to make sure the entire bucket is replicated, so we're going to use apply to all objects in the bucket. Now you're informed that an IAM role or roles will be generated based on your configuration, and this will provide S3 with the permissions that it needs to replicate objects between the buckets. Now this is informational, we don't need to do anything, so let's move on. Now you're also told what encryption settings are used, as well as the destination storage class. Now because of the template that we've picked above, we don't get to change the destination storage class, and that's okay. If we scroll down to the bottom, we have additional replication options. We have replication time control, which applies an SLA to the replication process. We have replication metrics and notifications to provide additional rich information. And we can choose whether to replicate delete markers and whether to replicate modifications. Now for this mini project, we're not going to use replication time control. We don't need that level of SLA. We are going to make sure that replication metrics and notifications is selected. We don't want to replicate delete markers, and we do want to make sure that replica modification sync is checked. So we only want replication metrics and notifications and replica modification sync. So make sure that both of those are checked, and then click on create replication rules. Now at this point, all of the buckets within this multi-region access point are now replicating with each other. In our case, it's only the two. In my case, it's Canada and Sydney. So go ahead and click on close, and we can see how this graphical representation has changed, showing us that we now have two-way replication, in my case between Sydney and Canada. Now at this point we need to test out the multi-region access point, and rather than having you configure your local command line interface, we're going to do that with Cloud Shell. Now what I want you to do is to go ahead and move to a different AWS region, so not the same AWS regions that either of your buckets are created in. What I do want you to do though is pick a region close to one of your buckets. Now I'm going to start off with Sydney, and in order to test this, I'm going to switch across to the Tokyo region, which is relatively close to Sydney, at least from a global perspective. So I'm going to click on the region drop down at the top and change it from Sydney to Tokyo. And once I'm there, I'm going to click on this icon which starts the Cloud Shell. If this is the first time you're using it in this region, you'll probably get the Welcome to AWS Cloud Shell notification. Just either click on close or check this box and then click on close if you don't want to see this notification again. Now all of these commands that we're going to be running are in the instructions which are attached to this video. The first thing that we're going to do is to create a test file that we're going to upload to S3, and we're going to do that using the dd command. So we're going to have an input of /dev/urandom, which just gives us a stream of random data. And then for the output, using the OF option, we're going to create a file called test1.file. This is going to have a block size of 1 meg and a count of 10, which means that it's going to create a 10 meg file called test1.file. So run that command. Now once you've done that, just go back to the tab that you've got open to S3, scroll to the top, click on multi-region access points, check the access point that you've created, and then just click on copy ARN to copy the ARN for this access point into your clipboard, and then go back to Cloud Shell. Next I'm going to do an ls yes, making sure I just have a file created within Cloud Shell, I do. And now I'm going to run this command, so AWS space S3 space CP for copy, space test1.file, so this is the local file we created within Cloud Shell, and then a space, and then S3 colon // and then the ARN of the multi-region access point. Now this command is going to copy the file that we created to this multi-region access point, and this multi-region access point is going to direct us towards the closest S3 location that it serves, which should be the bucket within the Sydney region. So go ahead and run that command. It's going to take a few moments to upload, but when it does, switch back to S3, go to buckets. In my case, I'm going to go to the Sydney bucket, and I should see the file created in this bucket. I do, that's good. So I'm going to go back to buckets and go to Canada, and I don't yet see the object created in the Canada bucket, and that's because replication can take a few minutes to replicate from the bucket where the object was stored through to the destination bucket. If we just give this a few moments and keep hitting refresh, after a few moments we should see the same test1.file which has been replicated from the Sydney region through to the Canada region. Now S3 replication isn't guaranteed to complete in a set time, especially if you haven't configured the replication time control option, so it's fairly normal to see a small delay between when the object gets written to one bucket and when it's replicated to another. Now we're going to try this with a different region, so go back to Cloud Shell and then click on the region drop down, and we're going to pick a region which is close to our other bucket but not in the same region. So the other bucket's created in the Canada region, so I'm going to pick a close region. In this case I'm going to pick US East 2, which is in Ohio. Once I've done that, I'm going to go back to Cloud Shell. Once I've done that, I should be in Cloud Shell in a different AWS region, so I'll need to recreate the test file. In this case, I'm going to call it test2.file, and I'm going to use all the same options. And again, this command is contained in the instructions attached to this video. So run that command and it will take a few moments to complete, and then we're going to follow the same process. We're going to upload this file to our S3 buckets using the multi-region access point. So again, just make sure you've got the ARN for the access point in your clipboard, and then in the Cloud Shell, type AWS space S3 space CP space test2.file space S3 colon // and then the ARN of the multi-region access point. Again, we're going to press enter, wait for this to upload, and then check the buckets. So run that command, then go back to S3, go to buckets. I'm going to go to the bucket in Canada first. I'm going to hit refresh, and we should see test2.file in this bucket, which is good. Then go to buckets and go to Sydney, and we probably won't see that file just yet because it will take a few moments to replicate. So keep hitting refresh, and eventually you should see test2.file arrives in the S3 bucket. Now this time we're going to run the same test, but we're going to pick a region that is relatively in the middle between these two regions where our S3 buckets are created. In my case, I'm going to change the region to AP South 1, which is the Mumbai region. And I'm going to follow exactly the same process, so move to Cloud Shell. I'm going to generate a new file, so in this case it's test3.file. Now before we upload this, we're going to go to the S3 console, go to buckets, and just make sure that we have a tab open to both the Canada and the Sydney bucket. This test is going to be uploaded from a region that's in the middle of these two buckets, and so we need to be able to quickly check which bucket receives the upload directly and which bucket receives the replicated copy. So once you've got a tab open to both those buckets, go back to Cloud Shell and run this command. So AWS space S3 space CP space test3.file space S3 // and then the name of the S3 multi-region access point. Once you've done that, go ahead and run that command. It will take a few moments to upload, and then move straight to the tabs that you've got open to the S3 buckets and refresh both of them. If I look at Sydney, it looks as though that receives the file straight away. So this multi-region access point has directed us to Sydney. If I move to Canada and hit refresh, we can see that the file's not yet arrived. So this is receiving the replicated copy. And it does that after a few minutes. We can see test3.file arrives in this bucket. Now at this point we're going to run a test to show the type of problem that can occur if you're using this type of global replicated configuration using multi-region access points. What I want you to do is to open up two different cloud shells. I want one cloud shell open in the Canada region, so the region where you have one of your buckets, and I want the other cloud shell open in the AP Southeast 2 region, so the Sydney region. So we've got one cloud shell open in the same region as each of our buckets. Now once we've done that in one region, in my case I'm going to use the Canada region, I'm going to generate a file called test4.file. The command's going to be the same as we've used in previous steps. Then I'm going to copy the ARN of the multi-region access point into my clipboard, and I'm going to type this command again in the Canada cloud shell. So this command is going to copy this file to the multi-region access point. Now because I'm doing this in the Canada region, it's almost guaranteed that the multi-region access point is going to direct us to the bucket which is also in the Canada region. And so the bucket in this region is going to get the direct copy of the object, and the bucket in the Sydney region is going to receive the replicated copy. So I'm going to fully type out this command, and before I run it I'm going to move to the Sydney region and type out a slightly different command. This command is also contained in the instructions attached to this lesson. This command is AWS space S3 space CP space and then S3 colon / and then the name of the multi-region access point and then / test4.file and then a space and then a period. Now this command, when we run it, which we're not going to do yet, is going to copy the test4.file object from the multi-region access point into our cloud shell. Remember, we haven't created this object yet. Now because this cloud shell is in the Sydney region, the multi-region access point is almost certainly going to redirect us to the bucket in the Sydney region. So let's move back to the Canada cloud shell, run this command which is probably going to copy this object into the Canada bucket, then move back to the cloud shell in the Sydney region and then run this command to copy the object from the multi-region access point into our cloud shell, and we receive this error. Now we're getting this error because the object test4.file doesn't exist within the bucket that the multi-region access point is directing us to. So just to reiterate what we've done, we've created this object in the Canada region using the multi-region access point, which is going to have created the object in the closest S3 resource, which is the bucket also in the Canada region. So the Canada region bucket has the direct copy of the object. This will then take a few minutes to replicate to the Sydney bucket. Because we're using this reverse copy command in the Sydney region, it's attempting to copy the test4.file object from the multi-region access point to our cloud shell. But because this replication won't have occurred yet, and because this is going to direct us at the bucket in the Sydney region, we get this object does not exist error. And this is one of the issues you can experience when you're using multi-region access points, in that there's a consistency lag. You have to wait for the replication to occur before you can retrieve replicated objects from different buckets using the multi-region access point. Now this process can be improved by using the RTC option when setting up replication, but this does come with additional costs. So this is something to keep in mind when you're using this type of architecture. And if we keep running this command, we'll see that it keeps failing over and over again until the replication process finishes, and then we can copy down the object. Now that is everything which I wanted to cover in this brief mini project into multi-region access points. At this point, all that remains is for us to clean up the account and return it to the same state as it was at the start of this mini project. So to do that, we need to move back to the S3 console, go to multi-region access points, select the access point you created for this mini project and click delete, and then you need to copy and paste the name and click delete to confirm. Then we need to go ahead and move to buckets. Select each of the buckets in turn. First, click on empty, and you'll need to copy and paste or type permanently delete, and then click to confirm that empty process. Once that's finished, click on exit, select the same bucket again. This time click delete, copy and paste or type the bucket name, and then click to confirm. And then do the same process with the other bucket. So first, empty it, confirm that, and then delete it and confirm that. And then at that point, all of the billable elements created as part of this mini project have been deleted, and we're good to finish off this mini project. So that's everything I wanted to cover. I hope it's been useful, and I hope it's given you some practical experience of how to use multi-region access points together with S3 replication. At this point, that's everything, so go ahead and complete this video, and I hope you'll join me soon for another exciting mini project.